Hi, my name is James Andriella, and you're listening to the Back to Human podcast. On today's episode, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Anthony Chaffee. Dr. Chaffee is an American medical doctor, a carnivore diet expert, and host of the Plant Free MD podcast, where he discusses why he believes the carnivore diet is the true species appropriate diet for humans and also the diet that will lead to optimal health. With over 20 years of research into optimal human nutrition, Dr. Chaffee believes that most chronic diseases we face today are a direct result of what we eat or what we don't eat, and that these conditions can often be improved or even reversed by returning to our species specific diet. I'm very inclined to agree with him based off of my personal experiences with nutrition. And I may be a bit biased with this episode because I will be now entering my fifth month on a carnivore diet, transitioning from more of a ketovore approach where I was implementing some plant foods, but for full transparency, this was not without hiccups. And with this episode, I hope to bring some clarity to some common issues that people experience while transitioning into a carnivore diet. Without further ado, Dr. Chaffee, welcome to the show, brother. Of
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
course, of course. Can you let my audience know how you got involved with this carnivore diet journey and how long have you been doing this?
Well, I've been doing it now for the past 7 years. But the reason I got into it recently and sort of came to the realization that this was as impactful as it was, specifically from a medical standpoint, and applying this to my patient population, is because I actually had already had experience with it 25 years ago. Because I had taken biology and botany. I had already sort of understood that plants make defensive chemicals to stop animals and insects from eating them. That's their defense. All living things have a defense. Nothing wants to be eaten, but that includes plants. And so they, buffalo or bison or elk or a moose, they can fight back. And in fact, the top of the top five killers in Africa, of their animals, four of those are herbivores. So lions, yes, but rhinos, hippos, elephants, and Cape buffalo, those are the big five. Hmm. And so they are more than happy to kill you if that means that they're protected and they're protecting that their family. If they think you're a threat, they're gonna stomp you out. Same goes for all life on Earth. Plants are included in that. So it's not necessarily that a buffalo wants you dead, but in fact, hippos and things like that probably do want to kill the different things they're getting in their territory and threatening them. Um, Plants may not have those same motivations, but they have the same level of defenses. They can be toxic to the extent of being fatal, in many cases, to even herbivores as well. So that's a plant's natural defense, and I mean I learned that very early on in biology and botany. So I understood that, but then I had a professor of cancer biology that actually put this into terms for the produce side of the fruits and vegetables that we would eat on a normal daily basis. And he was pointing out that these defense chemicals and toxins actually could disrupt your physiology and cause all sorts of serious problems that could down the road lead to cancer. So they're carcinogens. Long before something turns into cancer, it's damaging your body and your physiology in significant ways, or else you don't just go from being 100% healthy to bam cancer. There's a long buildup of damage and degradation leading up to cancer. So he was pointing this out, and he was saying that he didn't eat vegetables or plants. He wouldn't let his kids eat vegetables and plants, and just impressed upon us that plants were inherently toxic, that they were trying to defend themselves and would do so at the expense of your life. In his words, plants were trying to kill you. And so that was very jarring to me, I think to all of us. And at least I went to the store and just went like, okay, well, what the hell do I eat then? I mean, everything has plants in it. Everything's an ingredient with plants or is a whole plant. And I just defaulted into eating eggs and meat because my entire litmus test was, does it have plants? Yes, I'm not going to eat it. And I felt absolutely amazing. I was an All-American rugby player. I was playing all the top leagues in North America and US and Canada. I later went and played professionally in England. And my athletic performance went to the next level. I didn't have any brain fog. I was a much better student. I was much more level mentally and physically. It was just a night and day difference. I slipped off of it when I was in England though, because I didn't realize how much of a significant impact this was having on my life. And as I sort of added in just little bits, I mean, even just having meat that had a bit of crumbs on it. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, well, is that going to be that big of an issue? Dose makes the poison, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. And yes, dose does make the poison. The dose is very small, much smaller than you think. And so even just having those crumbs on the outside of the chicken, and I had that maybe 3, 4 days a week, just because it was convenient, that took the edge off. And I remember thinking to myself, like, why don't I feel as superhuman amazing as I normally do? Am I not working out as hard? Am I not pushing myself? I'm 25 now. Am I just over the hill? Am I dying? My body's just breaking down. I couldn't think of anything else. So I just figured like, okay, I hit 25, and yeah, what they say is true. When you get in your late 20s, just all downhill from there. I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. And but at that point I sort of slipped back into eating a more normal diet for me. I was always brought up with a very healthy diet, never ate junk food, never ate processed food, always very clean, home cooked meals, predominantly meat because that's what I preferred. And then I'd make a salad because you're supposed to eat a stupid salad. And so that's what I ate. And I never felt as good. I never had the same athletic potential and endurance that I had when I was only eating meat and not eating the salads. But I didn't recognize that at the time. And then 12 years later, 13 years later, when I was 38, I was just back from doing humanitarian work in Bangladesh. I came across information that was very clear that no, humans just are carnivores as a species. That's the kind of animal we are. We've been apex predators for over 2 million years. And we're eating outside of that. And like every other animal on earth, if an animal eats something it's not designed to eat, it can get very sick. And we are no exception to that. And I looked back at my early 20s and realized that I'd actually done that inadvertently for 5 years, and that was when I had never felt better in my entire life, and I was always trying to figure out how the hell to get back there. And, um, and then that was it, and so I was only eating meat, but, like, small amounts of lean meat and just a lot of vegetables at the time, because I was trying to lean down, I was trying to get back into rugby, and after I'd been doing humanitarian work, and, um and I wasn't really able to lose weight. I had a lot of inflammation. I was tired all the time and, just didn't feel great. I was always hungry. And then I said, right, I knew it. I knew plants were trying to kill me, get rid of these stupid things. And I dumped them and I just started eating a lot more fatty meat because the fat's extremely important to your health and your energy levels and your hormones. All of your hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progestogens, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids, all of these things that come out of your testicles, ovaries, and adrenals, they're all made from cholesterol. And so you want the fat as well. And so I started eating a lot more fatty meat. I just dropped the vegetables. I was even eating carbs at that time because I'd already recognized previous to that, prior to that, when I ate anything with carbohydrates, my back would hurt for like 4 days. And so just self-preservation, I just didn't eat anything containing carbohydrates or grains. And so just getting rid of the vegetables and eating more fatty meat dramatically improved my health. And my weight, I started shedding fat and feeling massively improved from an athletic performance standpoint. In 2 weeks, I just said, "Yeah, I'm feeling great. I'm going to go back out and start playing rugby." And I was back able to get a dead sprint and keep up with everybody, and actually do better than most people. So that was when I really started looking at this and saying, okay, from a medical standpoint, that these chronic diseases, all these issues that we're having, these things started slotting into place. I mean, the signs are everywhere. I mean, literally, there's actual signs that, like at parks, I've seen signs that say, "Don't feed bread to ducks; it gives them diabetes." It's like, how more clear do you have to get? Um, there's a lot of signs at zoos and at parks saying, "Don't feed the animals; they get very sick if they don't eat their natural diet." But there are signs that say, "Don't feed ducks bread; it gives them diabetes." And it's like, oh, that's interesting. What the hell do you think it's doing to us? You know, we got fatty liver disease. We have no idea what causes fatty liver disease except for alcoholism. Oh, but they don't drink alcohol and they have fatty liver. We just don't know. Well, we make fatty liver in ducks. We make foie gras. How do we do that? We force feed them grains for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. That's all it takes, and they get fatty liver, right? We get myosteatosis. We see this on MRIs, and this is strongly linked to metabolic dysfunction and chronic pain. Is when you're having fatty infiltrates in your muscles. It's pathological. You're not supposed to have fat in your muscles, except if you're having a steak because that's marbling and that's good. Wait, hold on a second. Like, why are we thinking that's normal? How do we get that? How do we get marbling in a steak? How do we get that pathological fatty infiltration into muscle? You give them carbs. Give them carbs, you give them sugar. In extreme cases like Kobe sort of Wagyu sort of thing, they give them alcohol and sugar. Sometimes they'll give them like Skittles, like the off-brand Skittles, the Skittles that are sort of misprinted and things like that. To actually give these to cows and feedlots because it increases the fat, it increases their poundage, and increases the marbling. I even went to, I went to a restaurant in Sydney, and they had this their signature steak was this tomahawk that was a Wagyu steak that was um, 90-day handy finished. It's like, what? They literally just gave him candy for 3 months. So it's just eating, like, just troughs full of, like, Skittles and candy and things like that. You have to give them a bit of, like, actual food. You can't give it, like, 100% because they'll die. Like, they'll actually die. Same with grains. You can't give them 100% grains because they'll die. So they have to give them, like, 90, 95%. Even then, they get very sick, and that marbling is a sign of metabolic dysfunction. So sort of, yeah, sort of, to not to drag on too long, I just started noticing these things. And when I started applying that to my patient population, I saw diseases that we still think are completely irreversible. These chronic diseases, non-communicable chronic diseases that just get worse and worse throughout your lifetime. I saw them reversing and even going into full remission or just completely disappearing, including diabetes, but also things like congestive heart failure, surprisingly enough, mental health disorders, even schizophrenia, major depression, OCD, bipolar disorder, certainly other metabolic dysfunctions, obesity. Certainly, people lose weight very healthfully on this way of eating, and autoimmunity is probably one of the major ones that I've found that is likely there's a direct cause and effect relationship, I believe, between eating plants and inappropriate foods and having inappropriate exposures and triggering this damage to your body that we call autoimmune disease, which I don't think is actually an autoimmune condition. I don't think your body's attacking itself because your body's not capable of attacking itself. I think your body is being attacked by things like lectins, glyphosates, other sort of toxins, and your body's attacking that and trying to protect yourself from this. But because those things are stuck to your thyroid, stuck to your liver, or your pancreas, or your intestines, or your nervous system, then your body attacking those things, your body gets hit in the crossfire and gets collateral damage. But when you stop eating plants and you just go back to a pure red meat and water diet, these problems go away, the antibodies come down, and the symptoms, long before the antibodies come down, go away, and the tissue starts to heal and repair. And when you look back in the literature and you realize that people have been treating autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, ulcerative colitis, and so on since the 1800s with a pure beef and water diet, it starts to make more sense. This is not a brand new discovery. This is something that we've known for a long time and used clinically in clinical practice and is in the medical literature, but has been overshadowed and papered over by these massive multi-trillion-dollar food and drug industries that profit greatly off of us eating hot garbage and then getting sick from that and then giving us medication for that sickness that happens as a result of that. So that's why I waded into this, because I've seen how much of a dramatic effect this has on my patient's health. And I think that we've been lied to for far too long, and we've been misled into bad health. There's no sick species of life on this earth that is inherently sick. All life is healthy because all life is comes from the winners, the successful. So you can't actually have an unhealthy genetic population. You just can't, unless you've artificially separated that from society, or from nature and things like that. Because as a population, as a species, If you were just sickly and dying, I mean, you just wouldn't survive. You wouldn't be able to outcompete the other, maybe through technology and things like that. We'll get into like a Wall-E sort of situation where we're just fat blobs sitting there having robots take care of us. But we're not there yet, and so we should be healthy. And so our natural, just our birthright is to be healthy, and we've been robbed of that. And so that's why it's very important to me to wade into this and to get this information out to people so they can just be healthy and not need doctors for these chronic diseases that account for 90% of the deaths in Western countries and 74% of the deaths worldwide. We need to get back to having that be the minority of the issues so the doctors can get back to doing actual medicine, dealing with accidents, injuries, childbirth, infectious disease, these sorts of things, congenital defects and genetic issues. That's real medicine, right? And but we're being stuffed up just treating chronic disease, which is really just poisoning and malnutrition. We're eating the wrong thing. We're getting sick. You get rid of that, then all of a sudden we can get all these big brains, all these really intelligent and altruistic people trying to find better and better methods for improving human health, in ways that we can't just do naturally just by eating normal food. So that's why I've sort of waded into this, and I've seen massive, massive benefits to people that I've seen try this. So yeah, it's very rewarding.
So it's interesting that you kept mentioning waiting there. And a quote that I've heard before is that you can't build a garden in a swamp, which essentially is kind of what we have. So I don't think we're really too far off from Wally World, where we're
Mhm.
going to see people in wheelchairs and they're incapable of even the basic of human movements. And I also love that you can speak from this from an athletic point of view. And I'm a strength and conditioning coach. I have a bachelor's of science in exercise science. With the nutrition that I was taught in college, I had a PhD level nutrition professor, and I asked him one day afterwards, what would happen if I was to go into or do a ketogenic diet for a long period of time? I was in a state of ketosis for years. Would I die? And he said emphatically that yes, you would go into a coma and you would die. Granted, I've
Mhm.
been doing keto approach for the past, I'd say, strict for 5 years now, and carnivore for the past 5 months, and I'm still here. I'm still able to talk to you. And I was watching one of your videos early this morning, discussing why you believe that carnivore is our true human diet. It's like over an hour long, and it's just filled with bombs in it. And what you stated in there was that you believe that a fasting state, or I guess a carnivore or a keto state, because it's a fasting mimicking diet, is our primary state. And I fully agree with you because when you're in a state of ketosis, if you've never been in it, the very first time that I felt my brain literally click on, I was doing like MCT oils and butters in my coffee and stuff like that. But the energy and the clarity that I felt immediately, and I just felt my joint pain starting to dissipate. I was like, this seems like it's the right approach. Uh, it's very hard to tell people this if they've never personally experienced it before. And a question that I want to get into later is sugar a drug or is carbohydrates a drug? But what I was taught in school is that you need carbohydrates for anaerobic performance. Clearly, if you're a rugby player, you're not relying on carbohydrates on a carnivore diet. So did you experience any type of hiccups? Was there like a lull in your performance, or what happened as soon as you transitioned?
No, I didn't actually notice a lull. I actually felt pretty good right away, and certainly within 2 weeks, I started really, really ramping up my energy levels. Technically, um, you could see a drop off in athletic performance for the first 2 weeks or so, 2, 3 weeks or so, as your body is keto adapting. So you start making all these ketones, um, and you start making these ketones, but because you haven't been running on ketones for such a long time, I mean, in the womb, ketones freely pass through the placenta via passive transport. Women, especially in the third trimester, even eating a mixed diet, carbohydrate-rich diet, they're much more likely to get into ketosis and to make ketones, which will pass freely over the placenta. And then even though there's carbohydrates in breast milk, infants do make ketones when they're on drinking breast milk, and then when they get onto like formula, things like that, or more carb-rich sort of baby food, that actually suppresses ketone. Studies have shown that. So it's sort of a natural state to be running on ketones. Our brain prefers ketones. Our muscles actually prefer ketones. Our heart prefers ketones. Our intestines prefer ketones. All these other sorts of things. So because you haven't been running on ketones for a long time, though, you don't have the different genes, the different epigenetic sort of expression that allow you to fully optimize your use of those ketones. So you'll start producing ketones. But this is when people notice when they go on any ketogenic diet, first their ketones are very high. They might even see them in their urine because your body can't use all of them, so they spill out in your urine. Then after about 5, 6 months, now they're not in your urine. And people think, oh, I'm not in ketosis anymore. What's happening? No, they are in ketosis. Just their body's able to use those ketones much more efficiently. And so you notice that your blood ketone levels are much lower. It's not because they're making less ketones, it's because they're using more of them. So people refer to things like the supernova trial that said, like, oh, yes, fat oxidation goes way up. This is the argument for um, why you need carbohydrates when you're doing like anaerobic activity or a high performance activity. Um, that's that zone 2 cardio sort of thing, right? After sort of 55% VO2 max, typically you start switching over. That's sort of like his peak of fat oxidation. Then that sort of drops precipitously. And then sort of after sort of 55, 60% VO2 max, um, you switch over to carbohydrate metabolism respiration as an athlete. That's only in the context of carbohydrate fueled athletes, because even in the supernova trial, they found that. And they used people that were not keto adapted. They had screwed up their electrolytes. They had all these other different flaws with it as well. And they like put them on a ketogenic diet and then like tested them like a week later or something like that. It was very short, sort of within a week or two. They did all these testing, but even they found that that the people that put on a ketogenic diet, they were actually burning fat at like over 90% VO2 max, but they weren't necessarily having the same athletic performance in that first week. And so they said, well, it doesn't matter what your metabolism is, the performance is the most important thing. Sure, you could argue that from a strict athletic point of view. Now, if you're giving people metabolic syndrome and diabetes because you're giving a whole bunch of this garbage, that's and just to try to win a race, I mean, that's not really doing them any favors long term, is it? So, I mean, that's like the same argument as like, doing steroids to be a professional athlete. You're destroying your health. And then not only is it, that professional athlete is destroying their health, but they're a professional athlete, they're getting paid for this. How many thousands and millions of kids are going to use that performance enhancing method like steroids or carbohydrates and shit tons of sugar in order to try to improve their performance, and they never make any money off it. They only get the deleterious health effects. um, so it's a bad argument. That's what I'm trying to say, and it's also wrong, because when studies have actually done, so McSweeney and Volek, Finney, and Professor Noakes, all these people, they've been doing massive amounts of studies in the last 10 years plus. Finney had like 30 years, and actually looking at specifically at athletes. And so Volek and Finney, in their FASTER trial in 2016, looked at elite athletes in Ironman competition, ultra marathon runners, things like that. And these are world class athletes. And they had ones that were using carbs in the traditional fashion, and then ones that had already switched over to a ketogenic approach, which is actually sort of a thing in the ultra marathon and Ironman sort of thing for years now. And this was back in 2016, so it was like a decade ago. And they found that these people that had been on a ketogenic diet for one of them was the shortest amount of time was 9 months, the longest was 36 months, average 20, 22 months on a ketogenic diet approach, like a carnivore diet. Carnivore diets are ketogenic if you do them right. And they found that they were again um, oxidizing fat at over 90%, 92% VO2 max, right? So you didn't get this drawback. You did not need carbohydrates after 60% VO2 max. You were still burning fat. In fact, the peak was much, much, much higher. In fact, the amount of fat that they're using, you look at the curve in the graphs, massive amounts of fat oxidization. 90% of the energy used on a what was it? Was a 3-hour run was through fat oxidization, right? And the carbs that they were using, glycogen and blood sugar, that was completely made through the body's natural sort of processes. People think, well, is this stressing your body because you're going through all this gluconeogen? No, no, sorry. This recent study just came out this year actually showed that whether you're eating carbs, not eating carbs, in a fasted state, a non-fasting state, exercise, what you are making the same amount of um, you're going through generating the same amount of carbs through gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis does not change. It's a sort of a steady state in the background, regardless of what you're eating. So no, actually, it doesn't increase your stress. It doesn't increase your cortisol, anything like that. Studies have shown that people on ketogenic diets for 24 months showed no spike in their cortisol, or no deficit in their thyroid or testosterone, any other sort of marker. In fact, their markers improved, their biomarkers improved, their metabolism improved. And from an athletic performance point of view, Volek and Finney found that they were oxidizing fat, over 92%, or up to 92% VO2 max, and they actually were generating the same amount of glycogen that the carb athletes were having. So they did muscle biopsies before, after, and then 3 hours after recovery. So they did a muscle biopsy, ran for 3 hours on a treadmill, muscle biopsy, and then 3 hours after that, checked it again. And their performance did not drop off. In fact, a lot of these people are outperforming the carb athletes. And the glycogen levels were the same before, directly after, and then 3 hours after with recovery, even though the carb athletes were sucking down sugar packs and gels all the time because they couldn't bolster their blood sugar and glycogen through natural means. They had to keep sucking down carbs. And the keto group just let their body do its thing. So yeah, so that's important to know too. McSweeney found in 2018 that by getting, again, top level athletes, Ironman and ultramarathon runners, that they self-selected into keto or carb groups. And so then they let them adapt for 3 months. So 3 months on a ketogenic diet. And then they tested them with 3 tests. So um, one was an endurance test, so a 100-mile run, and then a 6-second sprint, and then a critical power test, or like, powerlifting sort of things, so big explosive power. So all the different ways that you can use your body in athletic endeavor, they studied this, right? So the endurance, the explosive power, the sprinting, anaerobic, aerobic, everything, right? And they found that just in 3 months, that the ketogenic group outperformed the carbohydrate group at every single point, right? So they outperformed them on the on the 100-mile run. That didn't come to statistical significance, but the trend was that they were better. They outperformed them. But the 6-second sprint, the critical power test, that did come to statistical significance. So specifically, when people say like, well, you can do endurance stuff, sure, but you can't do like super high level rugby or sprinting or something like that. No, no, that's exactly the ones that have been shown to statistical significance that you can do. And anytime, whatever sport someone's doing, they'll just argue that, yeah, you can do the other sport, but you can't do like endurance. There's no people in the Tour de France that are on a ketogenic diet, except that Chris Froome is like a 3 or 4 time winner of the Tour de France, and yeah, he's keto. So yeah, no, you're right. It's not that there's keto people in the Tour de France. It's people winning the Tour de France that are on keto. So, and then the Supernova trial that, showed the fat oxidization, but, they weren't keto adapted. So it was just sort of a rigged deck. Um, the athletes they were using was like speed walkers. But really calling those world-class athletes, really? Like, I don't know. Like, I don't know if you're going to take much away from that, but either way, they weren't fat adapted. They had a week, and then, they had electrolyte deficiencies and all these other sorts of, there was serious flaws with it. And, better people than I have sort of done critiques of that. Like, my friend, Dr. Paul Mason, who's a, sports medicine physician in Sydney and who uses ketogenic carnivore diets for some of the top, professional sports teams, rugby teams, etc. in AFL, Australian Football League teams in America, in Australia. He's using this for exactly that, and these people are getting massive benefits from it. So um, you have these sort of flawed studies, and people will cherry pick and look at that, but then they won't even know about, Volek and Finney and McSweeney and Noakes. I mean, Noakes took recreational athletes, weekend warriors, and just gave them 6 weeks to keto adapt. And they found absolutely no drop off in performance. And I said, well, it's probably just, some excess glycogen that's just sort of stored up. And it's like, okay, well, let's just do 800-meter sprints. And we're just going to keep doing them. We're just going to keep going until there's this absolutely no glycogen left in your muscles. And we're going to keep seeing. And they kept performing better and better and better, while the other group was sucking down sugar packets and gels. Because the major thing with this is like, you don't have a drop off in your performance. In fact, people find a boost in your performance. But very critically, you're not giving yourself metabolic dysfunction and disease, which is really great, but also you're accessing your fat stores, because when insulin is up because you've eaten carbohydrates, it blocks lipolysis, which is the breakdown of your fat for energy. And so now your insulin is down at a normal level. You can go through lipolysis and you can generate energy from your fat. If you have a 65 kilo individuals at 150 so pounds, at 6% body fat, really lean top athlete, right? Small guy. So it's not even like huge bunch of amount of stores. The maximal amount of glycogen storage in the liver and muscles is about 2,400 calories, kilocalories, food calories. Um, so fine, okay, so you can do something with that, but if it's a big prolonged like Ironman, you are going to run out. That you're going to use way more calories than that, or require way more energy than that. And however, that same 65 kilo individual at only 6% body fat, that 6% body fat can contain over 35,000 kilocalories of energy. So it's over 15 times the amount of energy storage potential at just 6% body fat, right? And so if you're 10% body fat, I mean, you can nearly double that. And so you have near unlimited energy resources and potential. So you can just keep going and keep going and keep going and going. And that's what Volek, McSweeney, and Noakes found. They just keep going, whereas the other group had to just suck down sugar gels, or they were just bonking out. They were hitting the wall. And so the interesting thing about Noakes is that it was a randomized controlled crossover trial, meaning that they randomized these groups into a keto group and a carb group. Uh, Keto adapted them for 6 weeks, ran all their tests, no drop off in performance. They performed comparably, even though the carb guys were having to suck down sugar gels and the other group didn't. So that's already an advantage. But then they switched them. And so the keto group became the carb group and vice versa. They gave them a 2-week washout period. You can eat whatever you want. And then they went back in, another 6 weeks of keto adaptation. And what do you know? No drop off in performance. And again, the keto group was able just to perform, and the carb group, who had been enjoying these benefits of not having to suck down sugar gels, now they had to suck down sugar gels as well, because their metabolism was carbohydrate driven at that time. So any way you slice it, this is a massive advantage for performance. Now let's talk about longevity, because again, these athletes that were eating all these sugar packs and gels and carbs and things like that, and carbo loading, that disrupts and damages your metabolism. You give bread to ducks and they get diabetes. You give grains to ducks, you give them fatty liver. What is that doing to us? You're getting steatosis. That's happening to us as well. And so these researchers and other researchers have found, and just from people like top marathon athletes and all these sorts of things, that I mean, these guys are developing diabetes and pre-diabetes like in their 30s and 40s. So, that's a massive hit to your metabolism. And it could be, you ramp that up, you can even get that, earlier and earlier, depending on how um, you did this. And so you're getting massive metabolic dysfunction. Diabetes is really the number one risk factor for heart disease. It's up there with smoking. But also, and that's because it causes a lot of glycation. The high blood sugar level actually directly damages your body. And so you're getting diabetes. But what is diabetes? Diabetes is damage from high blood sugar. And so you're getting damage to your vasculature. That's damaging your organs. You're getting kidney failure. You go blind. You get Alzheimer's. You can get hormonal disruption because the insulin is blocking and screwing up all your hormones. I mean, we have people going ketogenic carnivore and their testosterone levels in men are doubling. I mean, you can't tell me that's not a performance advantage. Long past, long before you get to the energy dynamics of it or whatever, you just have double the amount of testosterone. Like, I'm sorry, you're going to be better at at certain athletic endeavors, and and you're not going to get sick. And some of this glycation, this is what damages your vasculature and makes it so people's toes rot and fall off. You have to get your feet amputated, and then your legs amputated. I mean, this is a very serious issue, having that high blood sugar levels. And that also it causes these advanced glycation end products that damage your body in different ways and damage your tissue. And we've seen in damaged arthritic joints that they're packed with these advanced glycation end products, this sugar damage from high blood sugar. And so sucking down all these gels and carbs and things like that to be able to perform at maybe the same level, but probably not as well as a ketogenic diet, and you're getting all this damage, and you're damaging your joints. Now you're getting glycated stress and damage to your joints, causing arthritis. As an athlete, your joints are your profession. Like, you start damaging your joints, you're not going to be able to perform. You're not going to be able to perform for as long or to the same level. Um, and so, I mean, the only reason that I'm not playing, high level rugby right now at 45 is because I damaged my cartilage in my kneecaps because I've been kickboxing since I was a kid. So you can damage it from glycation. You can also damage it from physical injury. So I damaged this from physical compression impact from doing knee strikes and doing Muay Thai kickboxing since I was 14. No one told me that at the time, that could really screw up your knee cartilage. Would have been nice to know at the time, but now I've got to live with it. So that's the only reason. Like, the rest of my joints are pristine, and I feel fantastic. And but I have this arthritis, and so I get joint effusions. It just sort of swells up and sort of bleeds and things like that because of the bone on bone sort of action. And but these other athletes are getting that because they're just getting massive degradation to all their joints, and like then they won't be able to compete anymore. You you reduce inflammation. Ketones, beta hydroxybutyrate is the main ketone body that directly suppresses the NLRP3 inflammasome. So you suppress your inflammation. You have less inflammation in your body. You recover faster. You recover better. You can outperform and outcompete other people because you have less inflammation. You have quicker recovery times as well, and you're not getting all this metabolic dysfunction. I'm sure you found that even being ketogenic and having these plants that you said you notice a difference. A lot of people do when they get rid of those plants, they have autoimmunity goes away, their gut issues go away, IBS, IBD, they go away. There's a guy's a two-time Olympic diver for the US, Brandon Lasciavo. Really nice guy. He was on my podcast, and he went, more animal-based carnivore-ish, very close, and that massively improved his gut issues. He had really bad IBS to where he would have to take an entire packet of Imodium on competition days. So this guy's competing in the Olympics, and he's having to take like 20 or 30 Imodium a day just so that he doesn't have some sort of disaster in the pool, right? You're in like a little Speedo and water. I mean, that's not a time to have an upset stomach. And also, all the pain and inflammation and bloating that he would have with that. Now he's trying to dive and he's trying to tuck and curl and do all that sort of stuff. He said it was really hard. It was really hard to do that. And then all of a sudden he changed the way he eat, no problem. Didn't have to take Imodium, didn't have the bloating. Now it turns and tucks and everything like that. It was so much easier. All of these things are going to improve. And again, the testosterone. I mean, I see this all the time in my patient population, massively improving and optimizing testosterone levels. I mean, I have a 72-year-old man who tripled his testosterone levels and is now at an optimal level for a healthy 25-year-old. No TRT, no medications, no anything, right? I don't put people on TRT because I don't need to put people on TRT. I get people off TRT. I've inherited a number of patients on TRT, and when I can get them on a carnivore diet, most of them can come off. All of a sudden, their testosterone is too high. We drop the dose, and it's too high again. It's drop the dose, and we keep doing that. I'm like, I don't even think you need this stuff anymore. Stop it, and they don't. They have optimal levels of testosterone without the TRT. So there's huge advantages to doing this, and not least among them is the longevity principle that you're going to be able to perform longer and better, and you're going to be more experienced, and have more knowledge of your sport and your endeavor. And you're going to have 30 years, 40 years of background training in this. No one's going to compete with you if your body's still working in your 40s and 50s. I mean, like you will not be able to. I mean, like no one's going to beat you. Like you're just going to be unstoppable if your body still works the same way. My body works the same way now as it did when I was 22. It works better now at 45 than it did at 28 playing professional rugby, except for my knee swells up and is a pain in the ass. So I mean that's the only thing. But otherwise, everything I do is at a higher level than it was in my late 20s when I was not doing this. You look at Alexander the Great. His armies he inherited from his father, and he was in his 20s and 30s when he took over all the known world, but with warriors that had been fighting for an entire generation longer, right? So his troops were ranged in the age, and this is according to the history textbooks, such as from Professor Victor Davis Hanson, who wrote a whole book on this, that their age ranged from in their 20s to in their 60s. So these are people going around with a 14-foot spear with a 5-foot long shaft and a big weighted ball at the back, and they were just stabbing the hell out of people. They'd have 50-to-1 kill ratios in these battles, right? And they just stormed all of the known world and took over areas that no one else had been able to come close to before. And he died of basically alcohol poisoning at like 33. And you know, God knows what would have happened if he just laid off the booze a bit. But he was a bit depressed. One of his close friends died recently, and he just sort of went into the bottle. But in any case, you had people that were in their 60s performing as the professional athletes of the day. They were professional fighting force, and the stakes were a lot higher than just losing a game, right? You lose your life, and your friends would lose their life. So these people had to perform, and they did. And the only reason you're getting into your 60s to be a fighter is because you were the best in your 50s and your 40s and your 30s and your 20s, and they're still performing at that level in their 60s. Alexander the Great had a general who at back then they didn't just mark up the plans, go, okay, you do it. Generals led from the front; they led the charge, and so his general ran one of his wings of cavalry, and Alexander had the other wing of another wing of the cavalry. So they were at the front in the front lines, and so his other general of his on a horse leading the charge was 78 years old.
Mm.
78 years old in full armor and a shield and a sword, just hacking and killing people. I mean, that guy's got, a good 60 years of professional killing experience. Like, no one's messing with that guy, as long as he was able to still perform. And he was. So that's what our bodies are capable of. I mean, we think we should be dead at 78, but our bodies are genetically, naturally designed to live up to 120 years in health. And so if you're able to, eat properly and not get all this metabolic dysfunction and chronic disease, you should be able to be a professional athlete into your 40s and 50s, and potentially even longer than that. I mean, there are like the New Zealand All Blacks, the top rugby team, you know, of all time. They are always in the running, one or two or of that in the world all the time. They they have players. There's the Frank brothers that they've been sort of keto carnivore for a long time. I've actually spoken to a number of the guys on the All Blacks, and they sort of estimate that good 40-50% of people are on the All Blacks are carnivore or very close to it. And Frank brothers, they do keto carnivore, and one of them's 38, and he's 38, 39 now. He just got signed to another 3-year contract with his professional club, right? So I think he's playing for Canterbury, but don't quote. No, not Canterbury. Christchurch. Don't quote me on that. Anyway, so but he plays prop, and so in American football uh, terminology, that'd be like a defensive lineman. The big just collision, crash, crash,
Mhm.
crash. Every play, every game, every down, it takes a lot of impact and wear on your body. And it's like, you're not going to see like a really successful defensive lineman starter at 38 or 40. And they're certainly not going to get re-signed because their bodies are just broken down at that point. Their knees are shot, their back is hell, and they're just not able to perform. This guy's performing. and he's performing at this high impact, heavy, heavy wear and tear sort of position on your body. And he's performing, and he's outperforming everyone else in the world. He's one of the best players in the world. He plays for the All Blacks, one of the top professional teams. So, doing this will give you better longevity. It'll give you better performance, and it'll give you better longevity, and you'll just be healthier the entire way through. So, I'll shut up now because I just keep going on forever about the benefits.
I mean, it honestly does feel like a cheat code once you've actually
Mm.
experienced it. And as you were stating, it's like you have nonstop energy with carbohydrate metabolism, which I liken to with carbs. It's like lighting a match for energy, but meanwhile, being in a state of ketosis and relying on nutritional fat, whether that's like what you're ingesting or what you have on your body, is more like throwing a log on a fire. So it's going to burn for longer and it's going to burn steadier. It feels cleaner. It honestly just feels clean. And what I'm curious of, because I know it's very difficult to get through to like RDs, they're kind of inundated with, oh, carbohydrates for athletic performance. I've heard in a video that I know that alcohol must be metabolized before carbohydrates and fats. So if you ingest alcohol, that must be metabolized first. And then I'm curious if carbohydrates kind of act the same way, where what the body's trying to do is it's trying to rid itself of a toxin, and that takes priority. So I know with insulin, you can't dig into fat stores. Would you say that glucose alone, not even just from like refined sugar, but carbohydrate ingestion, period, an elevation of blood glucose is toxic to the body, even if it doesn't elevate it too much?
It is toxic to the body, and the thing is you have to remember is that, you'll get sort of a spike and a drop, and so even if you're insulin sensitive and, you can get that down to a normal blood sugar level quickly, you're still elevating it up past the point, that your body can really contend with the damage and stay on top of it. So, you have this sort of spike up and then it comes down, spike up and comes down, spike up and comes down. Okay, well, it's calculus 101. What's the area under the curve? The area under the curve underneath those big spikes, over where you should have over 100, on your blood sugar levels over 100, like, that's causing damage over that. Okay. So you can calculate all of that. So now that's not as bad as if you have insulin resistance, you have diabetes, and your blood sugar is always at 130, 140, and then it spikes up to 200, things like that. The area under the curve is much, much, much larger at that point, but it is always causing harm, even though it comes back down again. Um, I have heard that, well, certainly when you have high blood sugar levels, your body needs to get that out straight away, and that's why your insulin goes up. The thing is that insulin is not designed to be at that level. People think it's like, "Oh, well, you eat carbohydrates and your insulin goes up and it drives into the cells, and that's a normal reaction." It's a normal reaction down here at normal physiological levels. But when you're eating super physiological levels of blood sugar or of glucose, and that's getting super physiological levels of blood sugar. You have to raise your insulin to super physiological levels. That is a problem. If it was only that it just sort of it only drove energy into cells, then all you're dealing with is that area under the curve. Okay, all right, well that's more manageable, but that's not the only thing that insulin does. Insulin is an extremely important and very busy hormone, and it affects basically all of your other hormones, and it affects hundreds of other physiological processes in your body and your brain. And so the simple act of elevating your insulin levels to contend with these high levels of blood sugar will get all of those physiological processes in your body and your brain completely out of balance and will completely disrupt your hormones, which is why when people go ketogenic, they go keto, especially carnivore, because plants have hormonal disruptors as well. So you get rid of the hormonal disruptors and you're dropping your insulin down. So you have normal sort of baseline metabolic hormonal physiology. You see people's, insulin blocks estrogen production in women. It blocks testosterone in men. It blocks growth hormone in both men and women. So when you get rid of all that, you'll see testosterone improve in men. You'll see estrogen improving in women. It's high insulin levels are the leading cause of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because it blocks a conversion of testosterone into estrogen in women's ovaries. And so now you're getting too high of testosterone, too low estrogen. You get the flip of that in men, and
Mhm.
it's blocking growth hormone in both. So you get this complete imbalance. And so I've tested thousands of people's blood tests when they're just on a normal standard diet or even a vegetarian diet or a clean omnivore diet. And then you put them onto a clean whole foods ketogenic carnivore diet, massive improvements in their hormones, their metabolic system, and their nutritional status. So, there is that argument that, when you have your blood sugar up, your body desperately needs to get that out. And when insulin goes up, it sort of changes how your body is able to use different energy sources. And so because it's just desperately trying to get this out of your system. However, if you have somebody who has whatever on their blood sugar and there are ketones available, your tissues will preferentially use the ketones. It's just that when your insulin is up, it suppresses ketones, so you can't make them. So you don't have them. But it's done studies like if you look at like people giving exogenous ketones and you have blood sugar available, you don't have ketones available. You give them exogenous ketones, your brain will take up those ketones. Your heart will take up those ketones. Your intestines will take up the ketones. Your muscles will take up the ketones, right? And so that's actually a preference. Your body wants that. Now you get really super physiological. That's going to sort of change things. Right? Your body's really going to try to suppress ketones so you can get rid of all these carbohydrates as quickly as possible. And there can be competition for the energy dynamics. The people talk about like the Randall cycle and things like that, which is a very complex pathway. It's sort of very little understood for most people. And it's not something that I'm even like fully on top of because I just sort of sidestep it and just be like, well, just don't eat carbs and it just
Mhm.
doesn't matter,
Yep.
and so, when what we do know that when you have when you're in a sort of so-called fasting state. Now, you mentioned how I don't think that is a fasting state. Call like a ketogenic diet. No, it's a fasting mimicking. No, it's not. Fasting is mimicking the metabolic state that you should be in all the time. And so you're in that metabolic state whenever you eat anything on earth except for carbohydrates. So I eat, 5,000 calories in ribeye. I'm not fasting. Whatever you can say about my metabolism, it's not a fasting metabolism. Right? And so fasting just mimics that. All fasting does is it's not that you're not eating, and that's why you're in that metabolic state. You're not eating carbohydrates and raising your insulin. That's why you're in that metabolic state. So if you just don't eat carbohydrates and eat anything else on earth, you will still be in that metabolic state. So in fact, it's now switching. It's not even being called a fasting metabolism or a fed metabolism, fed and fasting metabolism, which is what it was 24 years ago when I took biochemistry. My niece just took biochemistry at the University of Washington in Seattle, and she was telling me, it's like, yeah, they don't call it that anymore. It's just called a carbohydrate metabolism and a non-carbohydrate metabolism, which is much more accurate.
Mhm.
And so in a non-carbohydrate metabolism, you're making ketones, but it's not. I think ketosis is a bad name for it too, because the defining principle of it is not just that you have ketones.
Mhm.
It's that you're able to make ketones, but you're accessing your fat stores.
Mhm.
That's the main defining principle. You either can access your fat stores or you can't. And so that's the metabolic state difference. Your insulin is down low, so you have all these different metabolic changes happening that are normal, and you're not suppressing all of these things. And one of those things is ketone production. But that's not the only thing. That's just this one small part of this broad picture. So when you're in that state, in that non-carbohydrate state, you make ketones, but you also make blood sugar. So your blood sugar will always be normal. In fact, have much better blood sugar control, will be much more stable. As like a diabetic, will be much more stable on a CGM when you're on a ketogenic state, when you're on a ketogenic diet, a non-carbohydrate metabolism. But everybody will have better um, um, blood sugar levels. And so when you're in that state and you're making ketones, your brain preferentially runs on those ketones. And people are like, well, that's an alternate backup source just when you're starving. But again, you're not starving. It's just you're not eating
Right.
carbohydrates. And now your body's running on those ketones. And in fact, you can give people exogenous ketones and the brain will take up those ketones, right? In lieu of the carbohydrates. So even though you have, so just because you're making ketones, it doesn't change anything. Oh, you need to do that as a backup energy source. That would only be the case if you had no blood sugar, if your blood sugar was zero, but your blood sugar is not zero.
Yeah.
When you're in a non-carbohydrate metabolism, you make blood sugar. Blood sugar is 84 all the time. or in other parts of the world, 4.5, just bam, right there, right? And so it's perfect. So you're making all the blood sugar you need, but now you have ketones available as well, and your brain is choosing the ketones over the blood sugar. You have blood sugar available, but 2/3 of your brain will only run on ketones. There are parts of your brain that will still run on glucose, but it's a much smaller amount. At any given time, you only have 4 grams of glucose in your entire circulatory system, and that's all the glucose your body needs for every single physiological process of your body and your brain, right? Just 4 grams. That's it, and you'll replenish that as you go, but you only have about 4 grams in normal non-diabetic levels. Diabetes is just 1 extra gram. 1 extra gram is diabetes. And so 1 extra gram is a toxic dose of glucose to your body, and your body responds to it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it by raising your blood, by raising your insulin. And so just 1 extra gram is diabetes. And yet we're eating hundreds of grams of
Mhm.
carbohydrates a day, and we think that that's good for, and our body's desperately trying to keep this under 4 grams. And eventually it can't. And again, you're getting that area under the curve, you're getting those spikes. So, yeah, there's a lot of problems with that. But it's yeah, when you're eating carbohydrates, it's toxic to your body, and your body is trying to get rid of that. But at the same time, carbohydrates are not the primary fuel source. When your brain and your body have ketones available, they preferentially go for the ketones as well. Like I said, ketones freely pass through passive transport through the placenta into babies. 51%, 54% of the calories in breast milk are from fat. So what do you think where do you think that's going? It's turning into ketones. It's turning into fat oxidation. So the predominant energy source for kids, even though there are carbohydrates in milk, the predominant energy source is fat, and so it's going to be fat oxidation to give those kids that energy. So that's our predominant and primary energy source for all of our tissue, pretty much. There's some exceptions, but the predominant, um, yeah, predominantly it's fat oxidation and ketones.
Mm. I agree. I agree. You mentioned PCOS, and that's one of the reasons why I fell into ketogenic diets in the past was because I was dealing with some women that they were infertile, they couldn't get pregnant.
Mm.
And what I noticed with women with PCOS was they would have facial hair. So they would
Mhm.
grow facial hair, too many
Yeah.
androgens. And then men, they would develop gynecomastia. They would get bitch tits,
Mhm.
essentially, man boobs.
Yeah.
So that was a real light bulb moment for me. I was like, oh shit, this is like it's almost flip flopping the sex hormones
Mhm.
right here. This is a problem. And then
Mhm.
you also mentioned um, electrolytes earlier. This has probably been the only thing that I've run into issues with. So maybe you can clear this up. Energy's through the roof. Um, I'm not dealing with like some knee pain that I was having before when I ditched the last little bit of fruit. It literally felt like the tissue around this joint was sticky. So I don't know if that was actual just glycation or if I was dealing some with some oxalate dumping. But the major issue for me, I know when you're transitioning to a ketogenic diet, your insulin's going to come down. You're going to be excreting more water, more sodium as well. Cramping. I get some really nasty like leg cramps or even like in my triceps. I was doing some bench pressing earlier today, and these are pretty intense cramping. And then also some palpitations, which once I started implementing some more magnesium into my diet or supplementing a little bit more, because I've heard that people like Bella, they don't salt their food. I believe that you've mentioned that you don't salt your food either. Is there an initial period when people are transitioning into a carnivore or a ketogenic approach where they may need to supplement with some
Mm.
electrolytes?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good point. Is that like I sort of alluded to that in the Supernova trial, where it was sort of a flawed study. They only gave people a week or two to sort of adapt, and they tested them, and that they had electrolyte imbalances and things like that, and that's where that comes from. So insulin is influential to your sodium reabsorption in your microtubules in your kidneys, and so that affects these sort of uh, these receptors that then will draw in more or less sodium. And so, but the thing is, it's a balance. I mean, the thing is, if you get hypernatremic, meaning that your sodium levels are too high because you're eating a whole bunch of carbs, your insulin's just going higher and higher and higher past physiological state. I mean, you're not born with insulin resistance. I've had patients that have had, 5, 10 times the normal limit of fasting insulin levels. And then, when they eat, it's going to jump up more than that. So obviously, at one point, they weren't making that amount of insulin. It's not like they had like an insulinoma, a tumor, just pumping out too much insulin their entire life. Not in this case, anyway. And so that's obviously something their body had to adapt to. Now, if their body wasn't able to adjust and their insulin was going higher and higher and higher, and you're just sucking in more and more sodium, and their body wasn't able to do anything about that and excrete more and sort of match that sort of inappropriate reabsorption of sodium and be able to excrete the right amount of sodium, you'd die. You'd be dead, right? Because hypernatremia, high sodium levels, will kill you. Get very confused, your brain starts to shut off, and you go into a coma, have seizures, and die, right? So that's really important to have normal homeostasis. It's extremely important for your electrolytes to be in a certain range. And so if your insulin's sort of going up steadily over the years, your body, your kidneys are sort of adapting to that, and they're going to excrete more sodium as a result of that. Okay, so what happens when you go into a ketogenic diet? You're not slowly coming down over years and decades, right? It's a sharper transition, and so you're sort of pulling the rug out from under your kidneys. You can sort of think of it like that. It's a sharp change, and I find actually that most people do just fine, that their kidneys will adapt and will sort of change over. Now, you can lose too much though, because if you're all of a sudden your insulin is just dropping, quite quickly, and your body's not quite adapted back the other way around, it's going to take a bit of transition time. That you can think of that as part of being keto adapted. Um, that can make a difference. And, normal people just living a normal life may not really notice it. Call it a keto flu. People sort of feel a bit off for a couple of weeks or something like that. That can be part of that. It's also withdrawing from sugar, withdrawing from carbs, and getting these plant toxins out of your system. You're going to have a withdrawal effect from that as well. But it can also be from electrolytes, and you can have too low of electrolytes. You can lose too much sodium. Water follows sodium. And so if you're losing too much sodium, you're also going to lose too much water, and you're going to dehydrate yourself. That's typically where the cramps come from. It's not necessarily that you're actually clinically low on your electrolytes. It's that you lost the electrolytes and you lost water with that. And so having a bit more electrolytes, replacing that and replacing the water will help you sort of rehydrate yourself and sort of retain some of that water. And so, yes, some people find that. One thing that a telltale is anyhow, you can feel pretty rotten or maybe not have as much of an athletic performance as you normally would. You can try adding in some salt and certainly increasing your water. That's the key there, is increasing your water, and see how that affects you. But also, people find that they actually get hypovolemic, meaning that their blood volume goes down a bit because there's less water in there. They're just dehydrated. And so if you stand up too quickly, you get that sort of a head rush. It can happen much more frequently. And so if you're standing up and you're regularly getting like, sort of a dizzy, lightheaded, you're almost certainly dehydrated because of lack of electrolytes. So add in the electrolytes, add in more water in particular. Most people find that just adding in the water, just drinking a lot more water when you start getting cramps will solve that. If you drink, you know, you can get, yeah, so that'll cover 98% of people. So the first thing to do is just drink more water, right? There is the 2% though, where it could be like an electrolyte imbalance that you actually have to supplement with significant amount of electrolytes. Like if you're too low in your magnesium, that can cause cramping. Serum levels of magnesium are extremely inaccurate. Your serum only has about 1% of your total magnesium in your body. The rest of it's being sequestered in your cells, your bones, etc. And so what's in your bloodstream is not necessarily indicative of what's in the rest of your body. It's like an analogy that I heard someone use was if you took 100 people and you asked them how much money was in their wallet, that doesn't tell them how much they have in the bank or their investments or what they owe on their house, right? It's just what they have in their wallet. So you're not going to be able to distinguish, what their net worth is, right? Based on that. So that's sort of like looking at your magnesium levels in your serum. A better way of doing that is looking at your red blood cell levels of magnesium, where they actually break open the red blood cells and look at how much magnesium is in the cells. And that's more closely related to the rest of the magnesium that's in your other cells and in the rest of your body. And that's more accurate. Still not very accurate, but you can just trial and error. If your RBC level is suboptimal, and because most of these reference ranges are brought up, but they're just averages for the community. They're not actually an optimal reference range. That's why if you go to every single lab owned by a different company in your own town, they will have different reference ranges because it's a different group of people came in that they made an average from. And it's not healthy people they're looking at. They're just looking at any random person that came in for a blood test that walks through that door. Some will say, okay, well, we have normal BMI and people with normal BMI and people with between this age range or something like that. But even then, you have normal BMI, still have diabetes, cancer, autoimmunity, and all these other sorts of things, and nutritional deficiencies and all that sort of stuff. You have a normal weight 25-year-old vegan. I would not use their B12 levels to get an average because they're going to be deficient, unless they're copiously supplementing, right? And even then, they're probably still low. Um, so yeah, so those levels are a bit inaccurate. So typically, you want to aim for the high end of normal, if not even a little bit above on certain things, and depending on the reference range. But there are optimal reference ranges that have been looked at, and so that those are the ones I use in my practice. But you know, if you are sort of below those optimal reference ranges, you could try taking magnesium, see how it makes you feel. Certainly in the first few weeks, being, you know, aware that you could be low on salt and that could be impacting your energy levels and especially athletic performance. So if you're an athlete, I always just tell people just to salt to taste, and usually your body will tell you how much to do. But if you're finding that you're not getting, you're sort of a bit flat and you're sort of, cramping or whatever, A, more water, but B, you could need more salt than that. So some studies have shown on ketogenic diets, especially in athletes, that during that transition period, that adaptation period, you might need as much as 5 to 7 grams of salt per day to account for that. Electrolyte loss and replace that as well. So, some people do, and you just sort of play it by ear. I usually tell people just to salt to taste. Me, salting to taste is no salt at this point. It just doesn't taste good to me anymore. It just tastes too salty, which sort of sucks because like can't really eat bacon anymore because it just tastes way too salty. Yeah, it
Mhm.
sucks. Yeah, that one was a hard loss for me, but um, early on, I salted much more than that. I salted pretty liberally. A lot of people, Bella, she learned this from the long-term carnivore people, and like they usually call it zero carb. Before it was called carnivore, it's called zero carb. Um, it's really just zero plant, and their teaching was no salt at all because it can actually change your hunger signals. You can actually overeat, and it can taste good even when your body doesn't want it, and you overeat and things like that, and you can have other sort of problems. It's not going to really cause blood pressure issues for most people. It's not going to cause heart failure or any of that sort of stuff that has been sort of implicated in. That's not really the case. There are some people that are a bit sensitive, and you'll notice that they have some salt in their blood sugar or blood pressure will pop up. When people are hypovolemic and their pressure is low, we give them salt water, saline, and things like that to bolster up their blood pressure and things. And you give them salt, it will increase their blood pressure and things like that. So there's that effect, but typically people won't get hypertensive to the point that they need medications just from adding salt to taste, typically. But there are people that are salt sensitive like that. Um, but yeah, that's a pretty typical one. And so Bella would have done that way, just no salt whatsoever. You might run into transition issues. Eventually, your kidneys will adapt and will be able to balance out how much sodium goes out because again, if you get that balance wrong and you get hypernatremia because you're pulling in too much because of the insulin and your kidneys just can't adapt that direction, you'll die. Now, if they're adapted that way, they'll have to be able to adapt back because if your insulin goes down again, well, then you're going to get hyponatremic and you'll die then too. So your body is able to readjust and adapt, but it can take time. And so, especially early on, if you're finding that you have a performance drop or energy levels or cramping or whatever, try it. Keep electrolytes in mind, and keep in mind that you may need 5 to 7 grams of salt a day, which is it's a lot. It's not a small amount. And almost everyone is deficient in magnesium, certainly below what I would call an optimal level. Even if you're in the reference range, and so you're not according to that reference range deficient, I would not see people in optimal reference ranges typically, even when they supplement. There are a lot of anti-nutrients, phytic acid, lectins, tannins, oxalates, all these things will block and bind to different vitamins, minerals, and nutrients and stop you from absorbing them. So a lot of people are getting low amounts of magnesium absorption because of that. I mean, caffeine will get into your bloodstream and strip out magnesium from your blood and strip it out of your body. And it'll also dehydrate you. So, drinking coffee or tea and taking caffeine, which a lot of people do when they're working out to give them a bit of a boost pre-workout, that's a perfect storm for cramps because it's not only going to strip your magnesium out, it's going to dehydrate you. So, dehydration and low magnesium is, yeah, you're just sort of begging for cramps at that point. So, if anybody's taking caffeine or coffee, tea, et cetera, like that, I always tell them you need to be on a supplement because I see so many people when they go on carnivore, everybody starts off below an optimal range, I would say. But then it comes up. It can take months and months and months to come up, even with optimal nutrition. But when they're drinking coffee and tea and using caffeine, I see it. It's very difficult for them to get into optimal range, even with supplementation. I almost never do. So yeah, it's yeah, things to consider anyway.
Another reason to quit coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's got tons of anti-nutrients. I mean, that's the worst one. I mean, I see it even when people are on medications and they're having coffee in the morning or even like half an hour after or something like that. It just blocks out the absorption. It's just like they're not taking these medications anymore. And you can measure these things. Like if someone's on thyroid medication, thyroid is a bit particular. It's very temperamental, and so you can't even have vitamins or breakfast or anything like that for half an hour after you have, or any of your other medications for half an hour after you take your thyroid medication. You take that first, and then you take everything else half an hour later. But I found just through trial and error, I had about 2 dozen patients that were coming in. They had been on thyroid medication, and all of a sudden their thyroid they're very hypothyroid, and they were still taking their medications. The only difference was that the only thing was that they were having coffee in the morning, and we just through trial and error we found that we had to delay coffee by 2 hours minimum after they took thyroid medication, or they just really weren't absorbing it at all. And some people were, increasing, by, 40, 50%. Some people actually doubled or nearly tripled their thyroid levels, their T3 levels, the active thyroid levels, just by stopping coffee or delaying it at least 2 hours, significantly improved it. I mean, going from like, 2.4, 2.8 up to 4.5, 5.5. One lady went from 2.8, jumped up to 8.6 just by stopping coffee. And so now that was way too high. She was like hyperthyroid. She was on too high of a dose. So we dropped that back down. Now she's in an optimal range again. But yeah, it makes a huge difference. And so even, barring all the acrylamide and the lectins and all these other sorts of horrible things, caffeine is a neurotoxin. It's an insecticide and is just developed by plants to fry the brains of insects trying to eat them. Even all that. All that aside, it has these serious anti-nutrient properties, and will just block out a lot of the nutrients, vitamins, minerals, proteins, and potentially even fats and medications, and certainly supplements that you're trying to take. And so it's just, it's much better to at least delay it significantly after any time you ingest anything, food, nutrients, medications, at least 2 hours.
Plants are literally trying to kill you. So
Yeah, they're not trying
right
to
there.
help you anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Last question I got for you, brother, because I know you gotta jet out of here. You mentioned Owsley Stanley in one of your previous episodes that I was listening to, the bear, who's carnivore for
Mhm.
like 50 years. And when I was reading through his stuff, he also recommends not doing the salt. So
Mhm.
my current
That
struggle right
that's where
now
that
with
comes from.
cramping and
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
it's I've kind of had to put my ego to the side because I want to tough it out
Mhm,
and be like, no, I don't need a salt. It's like
mm,
I need some help right now. So what he he also mentioned is how the way that society has developed their current norms or like why we eat these things that we do is due to acculturation, which is just
mhm,
passed down and we're used to it generation after generation. Um, Started what, like probably I wouldn't even know. I'd be lying if I knew. But
Mhm.
enculturation, and you also mentioned that people are going to get withdrawals from carbohydrates. So, what makes carbohydrates so addictive? Would you consider them overall to be a drug, not just refined sugar?
I yeah, it depends on how you sort of look at it. I mean, yeah, and the whole salt thing was not eating salt in those communities. That was directly from Owsley. Like he was very influential. He was carnivore for like over 50 years. Just did it on his own, and then when these zero carb groups started coming up, they were talking about these things. All of a sudden, it came out. It was like, well, I've been doing this for the last 50 years, and this is what I found. People were like, whoa, hold on a second. So they had these long, interesting, threads on these Facebook chats and people just saved them. They were like, "This is gold," and so they just saved all these things and compiled them into the Book of Owlsley, and that was part of it was that. So, well, it is true, and that we started really going after salt, more recently with the advent of agriculture. And it became extremely important after that. And Owsley argued that that's really why, because if you're eating like sort of a plant-based diet, then you do need different amounts of certain nutrients. That is 100% true. And so he made the argument for salt, which makes sense. We didn't have access to salt mines and things like that 50,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago. Now you found some salt. Would people eat it? Yeah, probably. Just like a deer go to a salt lick, they'll lick some salt, but they're not sitting there just chewing on it, gnawing on it. They lick a bit of salt and they move on with their day. And then it's going to increase your thirst and all that sort of stuff as well. But if you didn't get that salt from a salt lick, I mean, are you gonna die? Do all deer not able to survive in the woods unless people put up salt licks? Of course not. You do get sodium from the food that you eat. You get like 600 milligrams of sodium, which would be equivalent of like, 1.2 grams of salt-ish. Um, from just eating steak all day. So you're getting a significant amount of that, right? When you're transitioning, you may need, more than that, 2, 3 times that, right? Um, as far as but again, that's a different state. You're transitioning. If you were just from birth, doing this, you probably would never need to salt anything, and then once you're transitioned, you probably don't need to. Most people don't. I've met exactly one human being on this earth that long-term, years on a ketogenic diet has needed to add copious amounts of salt, and that's Dave Feldman. He just really has to go. He just does not feel good unless he adds a ton of salt. Now he's doing keto. He's not doing full carnivore. So is there a difference there? I'm not sure, but certainly I haven't seen other people on keto that desperately have to have tons of salt like he does, but he does, and he feels a lot better doing that. Fine. Just do what works for you. As far as carbohydrates being addictive, I do think they are. Certainly fructose, which is the sweetest carbohydrate that we know of. And that's why it's in everything. It's very sweet, but it's also very addictive. So that is a drug. That is by the strictest medical definition, fructose is a drug, whether we consider that a drug or not. I mean, we've had cocaine and laudanum and morphine and things like that. You could go to the drugstore and buy these drugs. You didn't need a prescription for a lot of these things for a long time. And, I mean, there was cocaine in Coca-Cola. That's where Coca-Cola gets its name, you know? Then they said like, "Okay, well, no, this is a controlled substance. This is too much." So, okay, so they replaced it with, you know, buttload of sugar and caffeine, other addictive substances to make you drink their product so that you buy more of it, right? The more addictive it is, the more compulsive it is for you to consume it, the more money they make because they sell more product. It's drug dealer 101. You need people coming back, right? And, so that is a drug. We know that's a drug. Even though it's not, legally defined as a drug and age restricted, which it should be. It should absolutely be age restricted because this can do serious harm to the neurological development of kids. And, so if you look at fructose, we've seen in human studies people that are, well, we know that fructose will give the dopamine response to the addiction centers, the reward centers of your brain, just like cocaine, meth, and heroin, right? So these hard drugs. Now, other things will give a dopamine response too, gambling, just being happy, getting a hug, something like that, but in much lower levels. Like gambling can be very high doses, but these drugs, massive quantities of dopamine are getting hit. Same with fructose. Dopamine is an excitatory molecule, means it makes your neurons turn on and fire and go. Okay. Your neurons get damaged when they're firing, when they're going. The neurotransmitter is actually, which is how they chemically communicate, is when they break down and get recycled, they actually are harmful. Those breakdown products are actually toxic to the brain, which is a really weird system where it's like their normal acts of communication actually damage the brain. It's pretty interesting how that works. But that's why you need to sleep. That's why you need to rest. That's why, certain parts of your brain are cycling on and off because they need to repair and rebuild. And they need to sort of break down these products. They need to repair the damage that was caused when they were on and firing. It's just wear and tear. Just like, you drive your car, things just start breaking down. You need to fix them and repair them and give them rest. You can't just drive for 50 hours straight without stopping the engine and letting it, sort of rest and cool down for a bit. The same with your neurons. The more you do that, you're just redlining your neurons. They start to break down. They start to die. And so your brain tries to protect you from that by reducing your receptors. That's tolerance, right? So that now you want more and more and more of that substance to get that same effect, right? So you have, more alcohol, more cocaine, more heroin, more whatever to get that same effect. And then if you keep doing that, you keep overstimulating those cells, they actually start to die. And so when they've done these studies with they've done like functional MRIs where they're looking at um, where this dopamine goes and what those areas light up. So you can actually see his colors light up. So you give someone like a dose of Adderall, something like that, like an amphetamine. And you give someone who's just not addicted to anything, just a normal sort of person, you give them that dose of amphetamines, and those areas of the brain will just boom light up like a Christmas tree on MRI. Then they give that same dose to a meth addict, right? Who's a long-term meth user, and it barely twinkles, right? Same dose, just barely twinkles, right? Because a lot of those cells are dead, and there's a high resistance as well, right? You have to have a whole host more of that to overwhelm that to get a bigger signal. But then they give that same dose of amphetamines to people that were metabolically sick, that were sugar addicts. Same barely twinkle as the meth addict. So sugar kills the same areas of the brain as meth to the same extent as meth. This is a drug. And you have withdrawals, and people report withdrawals. I mean, we use the same terminology. We've used this since I was a kid, long before that, I'm sure. Saying that kids have sugars. Oh, I got a sugar high. He's running all the road. Now he's having a sugar crash. He's freaking out, throwing things. Oh my God. And he'll say, oh, he's just coming down off sugar. We're using the same terminology as like drugs. Oh, he's coming off meth. He's just coming down off. Oh, he's on his meth high. Ah, he's just coming. He's at his meth crash, something like that. And we talk about it all cute. Oh yeah, he's just a kid. He's just crashing off sugar. It's a drug. We've even been referring to it as a drug and in terms of a drug for a long time without even realizing it. But that is what we are seeing. People have just sort of unconsciously been aware that people are getting the same sort of responses as someone would on drugs. So um, the other thing is too is they've done animal studies as well, and these go way back, giving them sugar and things like that, and they prioritize the sugar and they go after the sugar and all that sort of stuff. But they did a study a long time ago where they had these animals that they had two panels, and a light goes on, and they're trained to, like, they know they can hit a panel and they'll get a pellet from one side or a pellet from the other side. It's either a pellet of food or they're going to get a pellet of cocaine, right? And so um, they found that in those conditions that and there's some nuance to this, but in some of these things they kept picking the cocaine button until they died, basically. And
Hmm.
but then, and there's some nuance to that because, some people have noticed that, like, well, you have these rats that are social creatures and you have them isolated, they're all by themselves, and they're doing that and they're picking the cocaine, but they're alone, they're isolated. Now you put them in a group and then you say, okay, pick cocaine or food. They actually were much like just picking the food. They didn't actually want to go to that. So you're having, like, social structures and networks, you have a positive, healthy sort of life structure and community structure and things like that, people are much less interested in doing a whole bunch of drugs all the time too. But when you're depressed and miserable and your life sort of sucks, you're like, yeah, drugs are a great idea. And so and then when you get your social structure is revolved around drugs, then that's a real problem because now you're socializing and interacting with people who are then now doing drugs, and so now there's both of those things there. So that's trouble too. But in any case, they also replicated these studies in mice, but they added a third lever, which was sugar, and so they know that they can get the food or the cocaine or the sugar, and they picked the sugar over both the cocaine and the food, right? They just kept picking sugar, 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 sugar until they died, right? So, this is a drug, and it damages your brain the same way as meth, and it damages your body in the same way as alcohol. We know from the work the biochemistry department at UCSF, among others, have done. I mean, I was even taught this in 2009 in medical school. We actually showed that fructose actually gets broken down in the same pathways as alcohol. Actually has a fatty droplet, turns into acetaldehyde, NAPK, all these other sorts of nasty things that damage your liver. You get from fructose as well as alcohol. So fructose and alcohol get broken down into the exact same byproducts. And so you get the same damage to your liver as well. So it's damaging your body like alcohol, it's damaging your brain like meth, and it's more addictive than cocaine in mouse studies, right? So this is a drug. Now, carbohydrates can be very compulsive because they can trigger hunger signals and hormonal signals that tell you to eat more, eat more, eat more. You raise your blood sugar, that raises your insulin. Insulin stays elevated even though blood sugar drops. And so now you get what's called reactive hypoglycemia, and your blood sugar drops too low, and you've blocked lipolysis. Your ketones are low, and your blood sugar is low, and you feel awful. And so you're like, oh God, I have to eat. I have to do something. I have to have carbs. And so you have that compulsion to go eat more carbs just because you don't feel good, right? As you eat carbs, it's a sort of a learned behavior that if you eat carbohydrates, you'll feel good again. You'll have energy, and then you'll crash again. You eat carbs again, so you just sort of you have those swings up and down. It also does something more insidious though, which is insulin blocks something called a hormone called leptin. Remember, it's screwing up hundreds of different mechanisms. One of them that actually has a lot of far-reaching ramifications is blocking leptin. Leptin is another master key hormone. It goes into your hypothalamus, which controls a lot of hormones that go affect the hormones in your pituitary, which affect all the other hormones in your body. So there's this hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis. And you can throw your testicles and ovaries in there as well. So you screw up your leptin, and now you're going to screw up all the hormones or many of the hormones coming out of your hypothalamus, and then by extension, your pituitary and the rest of your body. So it's a big impact, and insulin blocks that. Fructose also blocks that, so it's compounded. Alcohol blocks that. Lectins, which are the plant toxins, also block leptin and a couple other things as well. But so insulin will block that as well. Leptin is your satiety hormone. It comes from your fat cells predominantly. Some will come from your stretch receptors, but so you eat a whole big meal, sort of stretch, it will release some leptin and suppress ghrelin, but the majority of it comes from your fat cells. And so it's like a running gas gauge. It tells your brain how much energy you have. And so when you block that, now your brain thinks you don't have any energy. You're emaciated, you're dying. And so it's going to slow down your metabolism and tell you to eat more because you're going to die. So let's go eat more. We got to store this fat. We got to get into a healthy fat percentage range. And so now your brain can't see your fat. It can't see your leptin, can't see your fat. So it thinks you're emaciated, thinks you don't have any fat left over, and that you're don't have any fat stores, and your blood sugar is dropping. So now your brain sends a panic signal that says, if you don't eat now, you will die, because that's the signals, it's the hormonal signals that you're giving your brain. And even though you've just had 5,000 calories in pancakes and syrup, 2 hours later, your brain's just like, you need to eat or you're going to die. Let's let's go. And you can be enormously obese. But if your brain doesn't know that, it doesn't matter. And so, it'll cause this compulsive eating. So, when you're eating carbohydrates, it can cause that compulsion. It can cause that addictive sort of eating where you're just eating more and eating more and eating more. in a compulsion, if you don't want to call it an addiction, it is a compulsion. Your body's going to be compelled to eat more because it's sending the signal saying you're going to die if you don't. And so it can take some time for that to come down. I mean, leptin resistance precedes insulin resistance. And so you can have leptin resistance years before you have insulin resistance, then your insulin goes up, and actually your insulin will come down first, and your leptin will take a while to come down afterwards. But just the affecting that acutely, it can be very difficult, especially in the first 2 weeks. You have a lot of carb cravings and sugar cravings, and your body's just like, no, we need this, we need this, we need this. Then as your insulin starts settling down, your leptin starts settling down. The thing is, it takes months and months and months and months and months for a very high leptin to come down to normal. However, your brain can start to see the leptin and can start to have less resistance before that, as far as what it can see. So but in those first few weeks, you can be very addicted to those carbohydrates, especially like as you're eating carbohydrates. Eating carbohydrates begets more carbohydrates, and this is why I think it's very dangerous to add in things like sweet fruit and honey, because you're going to run down that pattern, and you're going to the fructose is highly addictive, and anytime you introduce something highly addictive, you have a high likelihood of getting addicted, and
Mhm.
so it can be a real problem. And you have a little bit, and that turns into a little bit more, and a little bit more, and all of a sudden it's a lot, and that can be a serious problem. And you start with fruit, you start with honey, and then it turns into pizza and sodas
Mhm.
and things like that. And I see a lot of people go down that, carb hole where they just start eating all the carbs around them because your body's like, no, you have to have more, 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 more.
Mhm.
So definitely when you're eating carbohydrates, any carbohydrates are going to be sort of give that compulsion. And when you're coming off of that, usually about 2 weeks it takes before that compulsion and those cravings go away. If you're eating enough fatty meat, that can help suppress those compulsive feelings. And certainly after 2 weeks, if you're getting carb cravings, sugar cravings, it's because you're not eating enough. Or you've reintroduced some carbs, some sweetener, artificial sweeteners that can trigger the carb cravings again too. So, yeah, but, yeah, I do think, fructose is 100% a drug. I think that should be legally defined as a drug and should be age restricted. I don't think that any kid should be I don't think anybody should be having fructose, but, certainly not a lot of it. But, I no chance in hell that kids should be given, fructose while their brains are developing. Absolutely not.
Glad you kinda brought fruit into the picture at the end of that because that was gonna be my follow-up. Because table sugar, for those that don't know, is half glucose, half fructose, but fructose is the sugar that would be found in fruit too, so
Mhm.
everything that you just said literally applies to things that we consider healthy, the berries, acai bowls, and such, and like you said, carbs begets carbs, like eating more of it. I noticed if in the past I ate like a little banana, even though I was under my 50 grams net carbs for the day, while I was more of ketovore, I just wanted more and more and more. It's like it doesn't stop. It's not satiating at
Mhm.
all. And the easiest thing that I did was just load up on the butter as I was transitioning into this carnivore stage. And I didn't get any of those cravings at all. So,
Nice.
Dr.
Okay.
Chafee, I have really appreciated your time, brother. Thank you for just going in, man. You are an
Mhm.
absolute brain. As much as I've studied, I have tons, hundreds of books in front of me. I'm very bought into the keto lifestyle. I could never come off the dome like you just did. So thank you for all your knowledge. Thank you for your wisdom, brother. And if you'd be open to it, I would love to have you back on the show in the future.
Yeah, of course, man. Yeah, happy to. And it's just repetition. I mean, I talk about this a lot, so it's on the top of my head.
Awesome, brother. And
Cool.
thank you very much. God bless,
No
my
worries,
friend.
man. Thanks, buddy. Have a good one.